My name is Brittany Hayes. For 12 years, I poured my soul into the relentless, cutthroat world of investigative journalism, a field where scoops were currency and integrity was a luxury. My beat was gritty, dangerous, often thankless. I chased leads through back alleys, confronted corrupt officials in dimly lit parking garages, and pieced together fragmented truths that powerful people wanted buried. I've held the hands of grieving families whose lives were shattered by corporate greed, and I've stared down threats that would make lesser souls run for cover. One of my deepest scars, a jagged line just above my left eyebrow, is a permanent reminder of a riot I covered in the chaotic streets of Eastwick, where a brick, propelled by an unseen hand in the angry mob, narrowly missed ending my career and my life. The memory of the acrid smoke, the terrified screams, and the blinding flash of police sirens still occasionally ghosted through my dreams. But nothing, not the whispered threats from shadowy figures, not the anonymous death threats that filled my inbox, not even the day I won the prestigious Pulitzer for uncovering a citywide corruption ring in New Orleans that brought down a dozen crooked politicians, prepared me for what it would feel like to come home. It was my mother's 60th birthday. The party was held at the Grand Magnolia Ballroom, my sister Tiffany's idea of opulent extravagance, all crystal and polished marble. I walked in alone, clutching my small clutch bag, feeling the familiar hum of 1,000 unspoken stories in the air, a phantom soundtrack to my isolated existence. Heads turned, a ripple of recognition, then just as quickly, they turned away, their gazes sliding off me as if I were a ghost. My father, always the stoic, a man whose emotions were as tightly buttoned as his shirt collar, offered a perfunctory nod, the same detached acknowledgement I'd received after countless late nights spent breaking major stories, the ones he'd vaguely congratulate me for the next morning over coffee, never truly grasping the weight of what I did, the moral compromises, the physical risks, the constant fear of failure. He saw the byline, not the blood and sweat behind it. My younger sister, Tiffany, ever the drama queen, clinked her champagne glass with a flourish, the sound echoing a little too loudly across the room, demanding attention. Well, look who finally graced us with her presence, she chirped, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, but a razor's edge just beneath the surface. Didn't think you still made it to these family gatherings, Britt? Too busy chasing down crooked politicians, I presume? Her husband, a slick real estate developer with a perpetually smug grin that stretched across his face like a poorly fitted mask, guffawed, his expensive watch glinting under the chandeliers, as if Tiffany had just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke of the decade. My mother, beautiful and poised as ever, her perfectly coiffed silver hair catching the light, averted her gaze, her smile faltering just a fraction, a silent apology for a situation she seemed powerless to change. No one stood. No one offered me a chair. I stood there for a beat too long, feeling the familiar prickle of invisibility, a sensation that had become my constant companion in this town, before seating myself at the only empty spot, a small, tucked-away table near the kitchen's swinging doors. Every few seconds, a gust of lukewarm air, redolent with the scent of catering spices and dish soap, wafted my way, a constant reminder of my proximity to the service entrance. No one asked how I'd been, not about the sleepless nights spent poring over redacted documents, not about the threats that forced me to change my phone number, not about the quiet triumphs that reshaped communities. My aunt, always one for passive-aggressive jabs delivered with a saccharine smile, chimed in, her voice dripping with mock concern. Brittany, dear, now that you're, well, not quite as in the public eye, have you considered something a bit more, shall we say, stable? Perhaps writing for a local community newsletter? Or a column about gardening? She paused, as if expecting me to crumble. I offered a faint, tight smile, letting their words smolder beneath my skin like embers. What they didn't know, I had just turned down a highly lucrative position as a national correspondent for a major news network. A position that would have given me unparalleled reach and influence. Why? Because the network's parent company had quietly, and very unethically, acquired a controlling stake in a controversial private prison system I was actively investigating, a system notorious for its human rights abuses and opaque financials. I couldn't, in good conscience, report for an organization that profited from the very injustices I sought to expose. The taste of compromise was too bitter. I still bore the emotional scars of a recent exposé on human trafficking that spanned 3 states, an investigation that had nearly cost me everything and left me with sleepless nights haunted by the desperate faces of the victims, their pleas echoing in the quiet hours before dawn. And only days earlier, I had secretly signed on as a pro bono consultant for a small, struggling independent media outlet based out of an old warehouse in Brooklyn, dedicated to uncovering the truth without corporate interference, a place where integrity was the only bottom line. But all they saw was a washed-up journalist, too stubborn to play the game, too intense for polite society, a rebel who preferred the shadows to the opulent spotlight of their meticulously curated lives. Just as the elaborate dessert cart, laden with towering cakes and delicate pastries, was being wheeled out, a voice, sharp, commanding, and unmistakably authoritative, cut through the clinking silverware and the low hum of conversation. "Excuse me," he said, stepping purposefully towards our table, his gaze fixed on me. "Miss Hayes? Brittany Hayes? It is an honor to finally meet you." The room, for a fleeting moment, seemed to hold its breath. You could have heard a sugar cube drop. I hadn't been back to Everwood, my hometown, in over 10 years. 10 years of chasing stories, sacrificing personal life, battling deadlines, and losing myself in the relentless pursuit of truth. I'd spent more time poring over classified documents than attending family dinners. I'd seen more hotel rooms than family homes. And now, I was back, sitting at a birthday party where no one bothered to ask about my life, my struggles, or my triumphs. No one even looked me in the eye. I wore a simple, unadorned black pantsuit, a stark contrast to Tiffany's shimmering sequin gown, my hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. The kind of hairstyle that said, "I'm here to work, not to impress." When I checked in at the front, the hostess, a young woman with an air of bored indifference, glanced at her tablet and asked, "You're with the Hayes party?" As if I were some unexpected, uninvited guest, a last-minute addition to a meticulously planned guest list. She directed me to the far end of the candlelit table, right beside the kitchen, where every time the door swung open, a cold draft enveloped me, making me shiver despite the warmth of the room. I had sat in silence, pretending it didn't matter. I heard the whispers. "She's back, huh? I thought she was still off somewhere, digging up dirt. Still not married. Still no kids." I picked up my glass of sparkling water and stared through it like a distorted lens, hoping their whispered words would dissolve into the background hum of clinking glasses and the smooth strains of the jazz band. But they didn't. They never did. Then came Tiffany, always the center of attention. She arrived fashionably late, draped in a crimson gown that shimmered with every movement, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair cascading in glossy Hollywood waves. She walked straight to the head of the table, air-kissing the city's mayor on the cheek, as if they were long-lost relatives, whispering conspiratorially. "It's such an honor," she beamed, her voice a little too loud, designed to carry, "to lead the Everwood Angels charity into its next exciting chapter." She didn't look at me, not even a fleeting glance, as if I were truly invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of her perfect life. Our mother stood to speak, her voice crystal clear, cutting through the low chatter, every word precisely enunciated. She spoke of family, of community, of the blessings of a good life. She effusively congratulated Tiffany's nonprofit, praised my cousin for landing a coveted spot at a prestigious law firm in New York, and bragged about a 5-year-old niece winning a regional spelling bee. She never once mentioned her daughter who had crisscrossed the country, exposing truths and fighting for justice, the one who bore physical and emotional scars from the battles she fought. I raised my water glass anyway, my hand needing something to do, a small defiant gesture in the face of so much neglect. A great-aunt, her bifocals perched on the tip of her nose, leaned toward me, her eyes magnified behind the thick lenses. "What exactly do you do in that, journalism, dear? Do you, write those little blurbs in the local paper? Or maybe review restaurants?" I smiled politely. "Something like that." She seemed satisfied, nodding sagely as if I had just confirmed her neatly packaged assumptions. The real answer, the raw, unvarnished truth of my work, the long nights, the ethical dilemmas, the sheer exhaustion, wouldn't have fit into her neatly constructed version of the world, a world where women like me were meant to be demure, domestic, and decorative. And honestly, I was too tired to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was, or rather, who I wasn't. After the cake was served and the room began to thin out, the polite smiles starting to crack, revealing the exhaustion beneath, Tiffany finally made her way over to me. She leaned down, her voice syrupy sweet, barely above a whisper, as if sharing a secret, though her words were a thinly veiled insult. "You really shouldn't have come," she said, her breath smelling faintly of champagne and something cloying. "Mom didn't want tonight to feel overshadowed." I just looked at her, my gaze unwavering, holding her eyes until she flinched. This was the same girl who used to beg me to help her with her English essays in high school, the same girl who never once visited me when I was laid up in the hospital after that riot, the same girl who copied my term papers in college, then blamed me when she got caught. And now she was rewriting history, trying to erase me from our shared narrative, as if I were a mere inconvenience, a ghost she had to explain away. I said nothing, because I already knew her story, the meticulously crafted facade she had built, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was about to crumble. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, my motel room, a generic box with thin walls, smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. No one had offered me a place to stay. Not out of politeness, not even for appearances. I wasn't the kind of guest you posed with for social media, the kind that fit neatly into their perfect, polished world. The only message on my phone was a terse text from my father. "Thanks for coming. Your mother's tired, not up for visitors." A dismissal, polite but firm. I left the phone face down on the nightstand and stepped out into Everwood's eerily familiar streets. The same oak trees lined the sidewalks. The same faded brick buildings stood sentinel. But everything felt different, tinged with a quiet melancholy. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to breathe air that didn't feel heavy with forgotten memories and unspoken resentments. Air that wasn't choked by the weight of expectations. But this town had a funny way of steering you straight into things you weren't looking for. A few blocks later, my feet, almost of their own accord, led me to Everwood Angels, Tiffany's self-proclaimed boutique nonprofit, more a personal brand than a charitable organization, a monument to her carefully constructed public image. The large glass window out front was covered with a glossy, life-size promotional banner. And there she was, Tiffany, standing tall in a crisp navy blue pantsuit, brass buttons gleaming, her hair and makeup picture perfect, radiating an aura of manufactured sincerity. Pinned neatly to her lapel was a gleaming gold medal. Except it wasn't just any medal. It was the Civic Service Star, an old obscure award, notorious for its flawed engraving that had been recalled over 15 years ago, due to a design flaw that made it look too much like a legitimate military combat medal. That specific design was pulled before it was ever supposed to be distributed, deemed too easily confused with a genuine military commendation. The only way she could have gotten one was if it had been discarded or, more likely, stolen from some forgotten vault. And there she was, wearing it like it was just another trendy accessory, a symbol of a heroism she hadn't earned. Beneath the image, in bold sweeping letters, the caption read, "From family legacy to community impact, Tiffany Hayes." That's when I remembered what she'd said the night before, half laughing over champagne with a gaggle of her socialite friends, her voice carrying across the ballroom. My sister tried the whole truth and justice thing, but it wasn't for her. Too messy, you know. I learned from her mistakes, darling. I stared up at the banner, my mouth dry, my stomach a tight cold knot. This wasn't just envy. This was a calculated dismantling of my own narrative. I didn't go inside. Didn't make a scene. I just turned and walked fast toward the one place in town that still smelled like a true part of my childhood. Hayes Books. My dad's old bookstore. The bell above the door still jingled with the same familiar, comforting chime. A sound that always made me feel like I was stepping back in time. It still smelled of aged paper and comforting dust. A scent that promised endless stories and quiet contemplation. I stepped inside, walked past the same old, well-worn travel section and the creaking leather armchairs where I used to lose myself in stories, escaping the confines of my small town, dreaming of faraway lands and daring adventures. And there, on his cluttered desk, beneath a stack of invoices and a half-eaten sandwich, was a framed certificate. It bore my name, but not my actual accomplishments, not my investigative awards, not the truth of the battles I'd fought, just some sanitized version of me. Cropped, altered, invented, stripped of any grit or danger. It read, "For community contributions," a vague, meaningless platitude that could have applied to anyone. I picked it up just as my father stepped out from the back, his eyes widening slightly as he saw what I was holding. He froze, said nothing, a silent admission of guilt. "Why?" I asked. My voice barely a whisper, the word feeling too heavy to say aloud. He rubbed his jaw, a nervous habit, his gaze shifting uncomfortably from the certificate to my face. "Your mother, she didn't want people thinking you were involved in anything too controversial. Tiffany fits better," he added. Almost defensively, his voice hushed as if even now, in the quiet solitude of the bookstore, someone might be listening. "She's more public-friendly. She's easier to explain." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. I just folded the certificate once, sharply, the paper creasing with a satisfying snap, and slipped it into my coat pocket. It felt like a small act of defiance. A reclaiming of my own story. I hadn't planned on attending Tiffany's big charity gala fundraiser that evening. The thought of another night of polite slights and veiled insults made my stomach clench. But after seeing that fake civic service star in her window and that forged certificate on my father's desk, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was something colder, clearer, a precise resolve that settled deep in my bones. I needed to see what lie she was telling next. I needed to understand the full extent of their fabrication. The Everwood Country Club ballroom was gleaming under the soft glow of 1,000 candles, polished hardwood floors that reflected the light like a mirror, crystal chandeliers that glittered like frozen tears, casting dancing shadows on the walls, a jazz quartet in the corner playing softly, their smooth melodies barely audible above the din of polite conversation, and a sea of people whose smiles looked laminated, fixed in place like masks, their eyes giving away nothing. I checked the seating chart. Table 18, right next to the restrooms and a service station, a clear indication of my status as an afterthought. The woman across from me didn't look up from her phone the entire time, her thumb scrolling endlessly. The man next to me was already halfway through his second bourbon and softly humming along with the band, off-key, lost in his own world. Fine by me. I didn't come for conversation. I came to observe. About halfway through the night, a tall, silver-haired man took the stage. He was impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored navy suit that seemed to be poured onto his frame, with polished Italian shoes that gleamed under the stage lights, and a condescending smile that seemed permanently etched below his chin, an expression that suggested he knew something you didn't. This was Arthur Sterling, Tiffany's biggest donor, a powerful media mogul with a vast empire of tabloids and gossip sites, and her self-declared mentor. His presence exuded power and an unsettling sense of control. "Tonight," he began, his voice booming across the ballroom, amplified by the sound system, "we celebrate vision, determination, and resilience. Tiffany Hayes is the face of a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. Even with a family name once marred by journalistic indiscretion, she has risen above." I blinked. A slow, disbelieving blink. Journalistic indiscretion? I had never been formally investigated, never faced an ethics committee. My work had been rigorously vetted, my sources confirmed, my integrity unblemished. Then I remembered the whispers, the veiled accusations that had followed me after that big corruption expose in New Orleans. I'd been accused of reckless reporting and unverified claims, all by the very people I was exposing, all designed to discredit me, to smear my name and undermine my credibility. I'd caught a piece of shrapnel from a hurled object while pulling a source from a hostile crowd during a protest, a physical manifestation of the vitriol I often faced. There were always skeptics, people who didn't read the exhaustive reports, who believed the worst because the truth was less sensational, less convenient, less easy to digest. But I documented everything, every source, every fact, every piece of evidence. I'd been cleared by my editors, my work rigorously vetted, published with full confidence. That should have been the end of it. Apparently, someone wanted to drag the ghost back out of the files, to weaponize old, baseless accusations for their own gain. I slipped away from the table, my heels soft against the plush carpet, moving like a shadow. I just needed a second of air, a second where no one was spinning my story for me, where the air wasn't thick with lies. That's when I heard them. Two voices behind the catering door, muffled, but close enough to make out their words. One of them was Tiffany. "She never defends herself," she whispered, a smug satisfaction in her tone, a cruel edge to her voice. "That's the best part. Sterling says if things ever get messy, we've got that old memo she wrote. The one about her source, it's all we'd need, enough to ruin her for good." My chest went hollow. A cold dread seeped into my bones. There was only one memo she could be talking about. The one I wrote from a hospital bed, my body aching, pain medication clouding my mind, the fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzing overhead. I'd written that memo to protect someone, to take the fall for a decision that wasn't exactly by the book, a deviation from strict protocol, but one that had saved lives and arguably a major story. My source, a brave whistleblower named Mark Jensen, had made a split-second call in the field during a covert operation to expose a human trafficking ring. He'd diverted our planned meeting route, veering off into a restricted zone, to save a family of undocumented immigrants trapped in a raid near our rendezvous point. It went against some strict journalistic guidelines, jeopardizing our safety and the story, but it worked. The fallout, if his actions were revealed, could have cost him everything, including his freedom and his career. So I wrote the memo, took full responsibility, told my editor it was my call to diverge from the plan, a decision I alone had made. He died a week later in a tragic, unrelated accident, or so I was told. Now Tiffany had that memo, or Sterling did, and they were holding it like a loaded weapon, ready to deploy it at a moment's notice. Back at the motel, I sat in the dark, the silence oppressive. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the frantic buzz in my own head, a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and chilling possibilities. That memo, I hadn't thought about it in years. I wrote it with a taste of blood in my mouth and bandages on my head, my fingers clumsy with pain. It wasn't a confession. It was a decision. A way to shield a man who didn't deserve to be chewed up and spit out by a ruthless system. Mark Jensen had made a courageous human decision in a high-stakes situation. A decision born of empathy and quick thinking. His move had saved over a dozen innocent lives, people who would have otherwise been caught in the brutal grip of the trafficking ring. But the powerful institutions didn't care about the nuance. They wanted clean narratives, controllable information, and when things got messy, someone always paid. So I stepped in. I took the heat, bore the brunt of the accusations. Now that memo, buried for years in a forgotten file, was in the hands of people who were using it as leverage, spinning a false narrative for personal gain. I felt it in my bones. This wasn't just manipulation. This was intellectual theft, weaponized. A deep, cold anger began to simmer within me, slowly replacing the familiar ache of invisibility. I pulled the dented old reporter's trunk out of the motel closet, It was scarred with countless airline tags and faded stickers from forgotten assignments. It still smelled faintly of cheap coffee and old newsprint, a scent that was both comforting and unsettling. The latches were stiff with disuse, but I managed to pry it open with a satisfying squeak. Inside were old notebooks filled with scribbled shorthand, wrapped up case files tied with string, maps with cryptic annotations, and at the very bottom, tucked beneath a rolled-up trench coat that had seen better days, a weathered manila folder. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The memo, written in my hurried handwriting, the ink slightly faded, and beneath it, something wrapped in a thin, worn cloth. I unfolded the fabric slowly, revealing a small, unassuming object. And there it was, the small silver compass pin, no bigger than my thumb. Smooth edges, simple design, the needle still pointing true north. Mark had given it to me the night before that high-risk meeting. A nervous tremor in his voice, but his eyes steady. "You're the one who will find the right direction, Brittany," he'd said, pressing it into my palm. "Even if it means a detour." I turned it over in my palm, and that's when I felt it. A subtle seam, a faint edge along the back of the pin, almost imperceptible. My heart jumped. A sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I took my utility knife from my pocket and gently, meticulously pried it open. Inside, tucked behind the backing plate, was a micro SD card, no bigger than a fingernail. My hands trembled as I slotted it into my laptop. The screen flickered. It took a few seconds, an eternity stretching out before me. Then a folder popped up. Project Veritas, Confidential. 3 audio files. I clicked play on the first one. A voice I didn't recognize, gruff and calm, filled the silent room. "Manifest says medical supplies. You and I both know that crate holds illicit data. We move it before the federal audit. No questions." My stomach dropped. The second file. Another voice, urgent, familiar. Mark's voice, strained but resolute. "You can't run that kind of intel through a civilian zone. There are families in there, kids." The final file. Mark's voice again, lower, measured, tinged with a grim acceptance. "If I don't make it," he said, "tell Brittany. She'll know what to do." I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a chilling finality. It all made sense now. Mark hadn't just died in an accident. He died standing in someone's way, and now I had proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. The National Investigative Journalists Conference in Chicago was packed to the rafters. Cameras flashed, banners proclaiming various causes hung from the ceiling, and a cacophony of protesters yelled from across the street, their voices a distant echo. Some waved signs that read, "Let the truth speak." Others, "No more silent stories." I walked through it all, head high, step steady, a quiet determination radiating from me. Elias Thorne, a renowned federal prosecutor and whistleblower advocate, a man known for his unwavering commitment to justice, met me backstage. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You back down now," he said quietly, his gaze intense, piercing, "and they'll write the story for you. And trust me, it won't be the truth." I nodded. The lights dimmed. The murmurs of the audience subsided. The auditorium filled with whispers and camera clicks, 1,000 eyes fixed on the stage. I stepped onto the stage in a plain black pantsuit, no flashy accessories, no awards on display, just my name and the truth I carried. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, then spoke, my voice clear and steady, resonating through the large hall. "I used to think integrity was something someone else bestowed upon you." I began, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the audience. A badge, a commendation, a public recognition. But years in this profession teach you otherwise. Integrity is what you protect when no one else will. It's what you stand for when the world demands you sit down. I tapped a remote. The giant screen behind me lit up. First, images of the corruption I'd exposed in Everwood. Photos of ruined lives, empty promises, and smoke-filled rooms where deals were made in the dark. Then came the audio. Mark's voice echoed through the auditorium, clear and urgent. You can't run that kind of intel through a civilian zone. There are families in there, kids. Silence. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Then the final clip. Mark's voice, tinged with a tragic resolve. If I don't make it, tell Brittany. She'll know what to do. I let the silence linger, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the crowd. Then, from the side of the stage, a legal officer in a crisp federal uniform stepped forward, his posture rigid. This recording has been authenticated by the Department of Justice, he announced, his voice ringing out, clear and authoritative. Miss Brittany Hayes is not, and has never been, under investigation for journalistic misconduct. She is a federally protected witness under Section 11B of the Whistleblower Protection Act. Her testimony is part of an ongoing federal inquiry into a wide-ranging criminal conspiracy. One clap, then another. Then the entire room was on its feet. A thunderous applause erupting. A wave of sound that washed over me. Raw and real. A reporter called out from the front row, his voice strained with emotion. Miss Hayes, after everything you've endured, what do you say to people who accuse you of surviving while others didn't? I looked out at the crowd, faces turned toward me, searching, expectant. I survived, I said, my voice strong, unwavering. And I've used that survival to say what the dead can't. As I stepped off the stage, the applause still roaring, I caught a glimpse of the last row. My mother standing, tears running down her face, her hands clasped to her chest. My father, hand over his heart, his stoic facade finally crumbling. But I didn't stop. I didn't wait for their apology. This wasn't about being accepted. This was about never letting anyone bury the truth again. It was about honoring Mark's sacrifice. 2 days later, Arthur Sterling's name exploded across every major news outlet. Media mogul entangled in data scandal, screamed one headline. Illegal information trafficking tied to charity donor, blared another. By noon, footage of him being led away in handcuffs outside his opulent estate in Westbridge, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and towering gates, was on every screen from here to D.C. He didn't look powerful anymore, just small, gray, and cornered. His expensive suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. His smug smile was gone, replaced by a vacant stare. The weight of truth finally snapped something in that perfect image he wore like armor. A Department of Justice representative called me that afternoon. You're officially registered under 11B protection, the agent said, her voice efficient and professional. You're now classified as a federal whistleblower. There'll be monitoring protocols. Expect some eyes on you. But you did the right thing, Miss Hayes. A very brave thing. I thanked them. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt heavy. Justice always comes late and never clean. There are always casualties, even in triumph. When I finally returned to Everwood, the sky hung low and gray. The kind of clouds that made everything look faded, muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My parents had invited me over. First time in years they'd asked anything of me. I stood in front of the house for a minute before walking in, taking a moment to gather myself. Same front porch, same 2 chipped steps. The rose bushes my mother tended, still climbing the trellises. Inside, not much had changed. The same beige carpet, the same couch cushions that dipped too deep in the middle, still bearing the indentations of countless hours spent watching television. But the silence was different. Not the familiar, comfortable silence of a shared home, but a weighty, expectant silence. My mother sat at the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't try to hug me, didn't rush to embrace me, just folded her hands in her lap and stared at the floor, her eyes glistening. I was afraid, she said, her voice small, unsteady, barely audible. Afraid of how far you'd gone. Afraid you wouldn't come back. Afraid of what people would say. She paused, and I let her go on, giving her the space she needed, a space I rarely received. I thought if we pretended you were something simpler, something softer, something less complicated, We wouldn't have to explain the hard parts. Wouldn't have to admit we were never brave enough to follow you, to stand with you. Across the room, my father stood at the bookshelf, his back to us. He reached up, took down the framed certificate, the forged one, the meaningless platitude they had used to define me. He stared at it for a moment, then without a word, he tore it in half. The sound a sharp rip in the quiet room. No drama, no explanation, just honesty. I didn't have the courage to stand with you, he said, his voice low and rough, filled with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. To acknowledge the truth of your battles. But I see now it was your courage that stood for all of us, even when we couldn't. I didn't cry, I didn't rush to forgive them. But I nodded, because sometimes silence says what words never can. And sometimes, acceptance is enough. 2 days later, I went to see Tiffany. Her office, if you could still call it that, was almost empty. The gleaming awards and framed photos of her with local dignitaries were gone. The shelves were bare, a stark testament to her crumbling empire. Her laptop sat closed beside a single cardboard box filled with framed photos and inspirational quotes that now rang a little too hollow, a bitter irony. She didn't look up when I walked in, just sat on the edge of her chair, her posture small and tired, her usual sparkle extinguished. They pulled everything, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual theatricality. The board, the grants, the endorsements. The donors pulled out. Someone leaked that the medal in my promotional banner was fake, the one from the old recalled batch. She laughed, a single sharp breath, more of a sigh, a sound of bitter defeat. I didn't think it mattered. I just wanted Mom to look at me the way she looks at you, with that quiet pride. She finally met my eyes, her own filled with a raw, unfamiliar vulnerability, stripped bare of all pretense. But I forgot what you had to survive to earn that look. Her voice cracked, a fragile sound. I gave them the memo, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't even read it. Sterling's team said it was for background vetting. I skimmed it. Didn't know what they'd do with it. I didn't know it would destroy you. I just wanted to impress him, to be important. I let her words sit there long enough to make her squirm, not out of cruelty, but because she needed to feel the weight of what she'd done, to truly internalize the consequences of her actions. Finally, I said, my tone not angry, just clear, firm, and unwavering. You don't need to be me, Tiffany. But you need to stop turning other people's battles into your stage. You need to find your own truth. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just nodded. And for the first time, I think she understood. She saw the line between admiration and theft, and realized she'd crossed it irrevocably. 3 months later, the Mark Jensen Investigative Resource Center opened its doors on the outskirts of Everwood. Not a grand, ostentatious building, but a modest, functional space. A place where truth could be pursued without fanfare. The town that once looked past me now stood shoulder to shoulder in the early morning light. Banners proclaiming truth triumphs and voices unsilenced lined the pathway. People gathered in quiet solidarity. A diverse crowd of activists, local citizens, and fellow journalists. There were no press stunts, no camera crews, no overpolished speeches. Exactly how Mark would have wanted it. Inside the main entrance, a glass case held the silver compass pin, polished but worn, a silent testament to its journey. Below it, a plaque read, "Proof of survival, promise to speak." I stood beside it in a simple black dress, not for recognition, but for remembrance, my hand resting lightly on the cool glass. Next to me, Maya, Mark's daughter, held a framed photo of her father, his smiling face looking out at the room. She was 16 now, taller, quieter, but strong in the way kids are when they've had to grow up early, forged in the crucible of loss. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence was louder than any tribute, a living embodiment of the truth. Toward the back of the room, I saw Tiffany. No makeup, no spotlight, just her wearing a white blouse and jeans, hands folded, eyes locked on mine. And this time, she didn't look away. A reporter caught me just as I stepped outside the center. A young woman with bright, eager eyes. She wasn't pushy, just curious, holding a small recorder in her hand. "Miss Hayes," she asked after everything, "what matters most to you now?" I paused, looked back at Maya standing beside that silver compass, at the plaque, at the townspeople, the activists, the families, the ordinary citizens standing still in the morning light, their faces etched with a quiet hope. "That this place stays standing," I said, my voice carrying softly on the breeze, "and that the truth stands with it, always." It wasn't a soundbite, it was the only thing I had left to offer. It was my unwavering promise. Later that day, I walked the familiar streets of Everwood, not to visit anyone, not for some grand moment of reconciliation, but because I needed to feel the ground beneath me, to connect with the quiet pulse of the town. The same sidewalks I used to bike on as a child, the same old oak trees, the same benches my mom and I sat on after school, sharing secrets and dreams. Nothing had changed, and everything had. I stopped by Hayes Books one last time. The bell still jingled, a comforting sound in the quiet afternoon. Inside, my father was shelving paperbacks in the history section, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "You got time for coffee?" he asked, his voice softer than I remembered. I nodded. He didn't try to apologize again. He didn't need to. We sat in silence in the small back office, sipping bitter coffee from chipped mugs, the aroma mingling with the scent of old books. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Progress, painstakingly slow but real. My mother joined us halfway through. No tears, just a warm scarf draped around her shoulders and that careful, familiar glance that mothers give when they're trying to reconnect without spooking the moment. "I started writing again," she said, her voice a little brighter. I raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing on my lips. "Just journaling, but I wrote about you." I didn't say anything, just took another sip of coffee. Later, as I stood to leave, she touched my hand gently, her touch light and tentative. "I know I can't undo the way we failed you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with genuine regret. "But I hope I get to witness the way you rise next." I gave a small smile. "You already are." Outside, I found Tiffany sitting alone on a park bench near the edge of the town square, her shoulders slumped. She wasn't dressed up, no heels, just sneakers, jeans, and a windbreaker, looking more like her old self, before the ambition consumed her. She looked like someone who'd taken off a heavy mask and was finally learning how to breathe again. The lines of tension around her mouth softened. I sat down beside her. She didn't say anything for a while, just stared straight ahead. Then finally, she spoke, her voice raw. "You know, I used to tell people I admired you, but really I envied you. And envy makes people do really stupid things." She looked over at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I finally understand what I stole and what I ignored. The actual cost of your truth." I nodded slowly. "It's not about awards, Tiff," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's about what we carry when no one's watching, and how we choose to carry it." She took a breath and gave a short nod. "I've got some rebuilding to do." "Start with yourself," I said. "Not your brand. Not your image." She let out a small laugh. A genuine one this time. "Yeah, that's probably a first." We sat there for a while longer, letting the wind pass through, saying nothing. Sometimes silence says everything. Weeks later, I got a letter from the Department of Justice. Not a new assignment, not a recall to duty, just a formal invitation to serve on a congressional panel on ethics and whistleblower protections in media. I accepted. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that real service doesn't end when the big story breaks. And sometimes the most important battles happen far from the newsroom, in boardrooms, in small-town politics. And yes, even around a birthday table where nobody saves you a seat. The fight for truth is continuous. The Mark Jensen Center thrived. It became a beacon of independent journalism, a place where aspiring reporters could learn the craft, and where victims of injustice could find a voice. Maya came by often, sometimes just to sit in the quiet library, sometimes to ask questions about her dad, her curiosity growing with each visit. I never lied to her, never sugarcoated anything. She deserved more than folded flags and sanitized stories. She deserved the truth, raw and unvarnished. And when she asked why I kept speaking up, even when it hurt, even when it cost me, I told her simply, because silence can be a kind of betrayal, and some people never get to speak for themselves. She understood more than most adults ever will. In time, the story changed. Not because I rewrote it, but because I refused to let anyone else do it for me. I wasn't the sister who left. I wasn't the journalist who disappeared. I was the woman who came back scarred. Yes, changed deeply, but unafraid to stand alone if it meant standing in the light. And the town that once looked away, now, it listens. There's something deeply unsettling about returning home to find that your story, the truth of who you are, has already been rewritten without your consent. It's even more painful when that rewriting comes from the people who were supposed to know you best, love you most, and stand by you when the world didn't. This story wasn't just about one woman's journalistic career or her hard-won accolades. It wasn't about the scars she wore beneath her skin or the exposes most people couldn't bear to read about. This was about the silence she endured when she came home, about being invisible in the room where her own family celebrated everyone but her, about what it feels like to be present but excluded, visible but erased. Brittany Hayes' journey teaches us one undeniable truth. Integrity isn't something bestowed by others. It's something you protect when no one else will. We live in a time when public image often replaces private integrity, where curated feeds and carefully staged moments are confused with real worth, where perception is often prioritized over substance. Brittany's sister wore a medal she didn't earn, spoke soundbites she didn't live, and leveraged another person's sacrifice to elevate her own profile, all for the sake of appearances. And yet, Brittany didn't fight back with cruelty. She didn't retaliate with vengeance. She chose clarity. She chose truth. And when the time came, she let the evidence speak louder than anger ever could, louder than any orchestrated PR campaign. This story reminds us that surviving something doesn't just mean living through it. It means carrying the truth of it forward, even when it's heavy, especially when it's inconvenient. It's easy to admire courage in hindsight, to cheer when the truth comes out, to stand and clap when a whistleblower gets vindicated on stage. But what about the years before that moment? The quiet motel rooms, the cold stares, the dinner tables where no one saves you a seat, the constant internal battle to hold on to your conviction. That's the part we don't talk about. That's the part that breaks people. But Brittany didn't break. She stood, and by standing, she did something so few dare to do. She made space for others to speak, for their truths to finally be heard. When she opened the Mark Jensen Investigative Resource Center, it wasn't just a tribute to a fallen comrade in truth. It was a declaration. This is what truth looks like when it's honored, not hidden. And it gave a voice to all the truth tellers who came home and felt erased, to all the families who lost someone and were handed nothing but silence in return. Her sister Tiffany eventually saw the line she'd crossed, the one between admiration and theft. And that moment, quiet, raw, with no spotlight, was redemption. Not through speeches or photo ops, but through finally seeing someone else's pain without trying to repurpose it for her own gain. The real legacy of this story isn't awards or news headlines. It's memory. It's dignity. It's the act of standing beside someone when no one else will, even when the world tells you to sit down. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. It tells the platform this narrative matters, and it helps the message reach more people who may need to hear it. Have you ever felt like your truth was ignored? That someone else tried to rewrite your story? Share it. Your story matters. And this is a space where it will be seen. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We share real human stories. Stories that challenge what we think we know about strength, survival, and the quiet power of standing up when everyone else sits down. Share this video with someone who's been silenced, misunderstood, or forgotten. Let them know they're not alone. that their voice matters even when it shakes, even when no one claps. And finally, live with courage. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the steady kind that keeps going when the lights are off and the room is empty. Because somewhere out there, someone's watching how you carry the truth. And maybe, just maybe, your courage will give them permission to carry their own. In a world full of curated narratives, be the one who chooses truth over applause, integrity over image, and memory over myth. This wasn't just Brittany Hayes' story. It was a mirror for all of us. And what we do next, that's our legacy.